Hey, it's Wednesday. Welcome to the show. My name is Mike. This is the Leadership Toolkit. As you know, your definitive leadership growth podcast. So each week, I have the awesome opportunity to have people come on the show from all different verticals of business. We have discussions on wins and losses, successes and failures, probably more successes and wins, because that's what we want you to focus on and be able to grow from and get some of those shortcuts in your own business, whether you're in a corporate environment, maybe an entrepreneurial place, or you're looking to grow. I appreciate you taking the time to tune in and join me today. So today is no different. I have the amazing Scott Doyne. He is a certified career coach who's conducted over 1,000 career coaching sessions with emerging and executive clients in career transitions. He's a former sports media exec with Turner Sports and the Bleacher Report, and he partnered with the NBA, Major League Baseball, NCAA, NHL, the PGA Tour, NASCAR, and now I have him on the Leadership Toolkit. So I'm excited to introduce you all to Scott Doyne. Scott, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Mike, great to be here. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. If you would take just a couple of minutes, and as we usually dive right into the show, I would love to have you share, a couple or 3 minutes of kind of what's your background? What is your background in business? Dive a little bit deeper. Let's talk about what's your background in and experience in leadership and management, and then we'll get into some more conversation.
Thanks. I really love this topic on leadership and management. I think there's some misconceptions about what that means, and it's also evolving. But I can
Absolutely.
tell you how I've evolved, I think, as a manager and leader in my career, most of which was spent in sports media, like you said, first in a production capacity, coming out of college where I majored in sports management. I worked in sports TV production. Went back to business school at Emory University and got my MBA. And after that, got into Turner Sports. And basically, over 20 years, moved around from product management to digital business management, running NBA.com, NASCAR.com. I ran a product strategy team. And then the last role was running research and analytics across Warner Brothers Discovery Sports, which included linear television, digital and web and apps, and also Bleacher Report and House of Highlights. Tons of great social data coming out of that. So with that portfolio that we had, I really had the opportunity to grow. Even way back early in my career there, I was running NASCAR.com, and it was a decent sized P&L, I thought, let's call it $10 to $30 million P&L. And I
Sure.
was looking around Turner at the time, and anybody else that ran a P&L, it was like a network, like $1 billion network, like TNT or TBS or CNN all around me. So I got this general management experience early, and I think some lessons I learned the hard way, but I also got an opportunity to experiment and grow and learn from those mistakes. And over time, it became more than just people management. It became initiative leadership or, managing across a matrix or multi-level management or leadership of a certain initiative that went beyond even one business unit, industry leadership. So there's all different connotations there. And to me, I feel very fortunate that I got to experience all of those, learn from them, and continue to grow.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm curious. First off, thank you for sharing all that. And like when I saw your profile and it's talking about all these different sports background, as we were talking beforehand, I was involved in a lot of hockey in the mid 90s, early 2000s, and so you automatically sort of gravitate to those professional levels of sports that you play in. I'm curious. So were you more in the 90s, early 2000s, when you were doing this stuff with the broadcast, and you said, hey, I was running nba.com, were you then running a team more behind the scenes? Did you interface on the front side with some of the coaches and players and stuff? Tell me a little bit more about what that looked like and how you were growing those entities.
Yeah, for me, it was more on the business side of things. So
Okay.
product management, kind of before it was called product management or
Sure.
over the top as direct to consumer became more popular, streaming. We were doing all that stuff in early 2000s. It's just not a lot of people were. The good news is sports fans, are ravenous. With you as a
Absolutely.
hockey fan, you're probably trying to find, any game you could, find the audio. When we were doing NASCAR, one of our biggest hits early was the ability to listen to drivers as they were driving during the race. So you could hear the
Right.
in-car audio between drivers and crew chiefs. And that gave fans that insight and access to the sport. So as I got involved in the interactive side of sports, it started pairing very well with what was already on television, but the interactivity of the internet just allowed fans to get that much deeper, not just with the sport or the headlines, but I remember in NASCAR, there were fans of certain drivers that maybe weren't the most popular, but they'd rally around that driver because they're from their hometown, or they just really loved Home Depot, so they became a Tony Stewart fan. And so like those ravenous sort of segments of the audience, using the internet, using digital marketing, using, imagery tailored to that particular fan and their interests. It was a really fun business to manage. And I think that's where I really developed my love, not just of the sport, but the business of sports.
The business of it. And the people. The thing that I find interesting is we talk about that, like leadership and management and the business side of things revolves so heavily around people. And like what you're talking, hey, sports fans, man, they'll get behind the person from the hometown. Or I remember, I remember the sort of the theory of it. I don't remember the individual, but like you would hear the way that people are speaking, or fast forward, I'm a Denver Broncos fan. And so the era of Peyton Manning, and you would hear him yelling all the stuff on the line, and you become connected with who you think that person is based on how they speak. Right. And so there's a lot of that stuff that is, that's just really exciting. I think sports, Americans in general, like we gravitate towards sports and athletics.
Well, and we talk about leadership, like that's where between us and the leagues, we wanted to innovate. Like leadership involves innovation because, leading means you're out front, and that's, leading edge and bleeding edge can be very close together, but pushing the envelope for the sake of satisfying that fan hunger, which we then we believed would turn into, like business models.
Yeah. And there's so many parallels in business. Like we use athletics all the time for metaphors in business and so forth. So I'm curious, as you're going through that and you're spending all this time, major companies, learning the business side of it, learning the media side of it, the communicative side of sports and so forth. How does that transition, and how does that look to transition to you doing career coaching and really leading people? And I'm curious a little bit about your transition out of that into your own career, because I think we learn a lot from that, right? Because that's what you do help people do at this point, right?
Yeah.
So what did that transition look like for you? Did it immediately, you went from, sports media exec to career coaching and leadership? That was the next.
Yeah, it was pretty sudden. It's relatively recent. So I was laid off by Warner Brothers Discovery in November of 22. Nobody, will be surprised that the cable business is challenged. A lot less people have those subscriptions, and the other bundles or streaming things just aren't the same profitability. So I saw some of that happening around me, especially because I was managing the research department.
Sure.
The metrics and the trends were not a surprise. So I saw some of that coming, and was able to prepare myself, be a little open-minded about what I did want for the next chapter of my career. And during that process, even pre-layoff, is when I met with an executive coach myself. And during that session, had the light bulb of like, oh, I think I can do that. And so I started training towards certification in that discipline before I was laid off. So by the time it happened in November, I had, a good amount of the business plan written. I did a few more months of, get the LLC and logistics together, and talked to 30 other coaches just to understand, their take on that world. And they're very gracious with their time and advice. And then in March of 23, just over 2 years ago, I launched the business.
That's awesome. So a couple things that I picked out from that, and I would like to lean into. One is you said, hey, I met with an executive coach. How did you know? Because I think it's important. So often there are people that get thrust into leadership, right? Like, hey, there are certain people, I think there's some talent sets that it's like you have a predisposition for leadership, but then all of a sudden we're there. And I think in a lot of organizations, I think in a lot of business, somebody does well at something. I've said this many times on the show, like, oh, you're a good salesperson. Boom, we're going to make you a sales manager. You'll be good at it. Oh, Scott was doing marketing. he's going to be the marketing exec or the marketing
All
manager.
the time.
Just because we're good at a thing, they
Yeah.
thrust us into leadership of that thing, right? And so I'm curious, because one of the things that you said, well, the first thing I did was you got yourself a coach.
Mm-hmm.
How did you, do you remember making that decision? How did
Oh,
you
yeah.
decide? Because it's one thing of, oh, hey, I see this layoff coming. I see this stuff changing. But what was the turning point for you that, okay, I need to make this
Yeah.
move?
So I had sent some of my staff to coaches previously, and I'd run people through 360s, and I'd been through some leadership training and done a 360, but I had not gone to a coach myself. At one point, this was probably April of 22, SVPs and above were offered a session with an executive coach. And because I was in this sort of exploration mode, I just did it. It felt like something where, okay, why not talk to somebody about what I'm thinking? I need to process this stuff. I'd mostly kept it in my own head because I didn't want to leave. And I certainly didn't want anybody to know that I was preparing for the possibility. So it was all very much in my head. And I think that situation, getting some of that out, has so much value. And then hearing some of your words back from that coach, because I remember that session very, very well. She was excellent in asking the right questions in the right way that created, a couple of light bulbs for me that really helped me determine my path to readiness. Working around, specifically this concept of loyalty that was a deep value of mine, having been with the company for almost 20 years at that point. Sure. And what I realized was I was loyal to my managers or my leaders in my division. But we had gone through so many acquisitions that at that point, it wasn't a loyalty to the company anymore, just being honest with you. It was a loyalty to the people. And she just sort of helped me see that and articulate it in a way that freed me from that feeling of like, oh, wait, I'm exploring other options. Doesn't quite feel right.
Sure.
But I still had to be my own advocate, and that was part of that path forward.
Thank you for sharing that. And I've got like 4 or 5 questions I want to go, and you never know which direction we're going to head. So that's part of the surprise. So you got the executive coach, you talked with her, you said she was awesome. Did you have the opportunity to interview and ask questions of her, or was that somebody that was assigned to you?
I believe they provided a few options. I chose one. She asked for some thoughts ahead of time about what I might want to talk about. We ended up talking about at least one of those. And then a couple months later, when my thoughts were crystallizing around this business plan, she was somebody I went back to get more of the advice side of, okay, if I'm going to really make a run at, starting a business like this, what should I keep an eye out for? What tools do you use? How does pricing work? Like that sort of stuff was a follow-up call.
Okay. And so one of the things that you said in that, I should have asked this one first, but we'll take a detour and then I'll come back. You said that in talking with her, you said, hey, I'm talking to this coach, and it was really helpful to get some of the things out.
Yeah.
And can you go a little deeper on that? Can you expand? What were some of the things? So if I'm in a role, whether I'm a leader, a manager, and I'm getting ready and I say, man, I think I'm going to transition, what are some of those things that I should be transparent and bring to the table? Do you mind sharing some of that?
That's a great question. Yeah, because that was provoked by her asking me what topics I might want to cover. And, it's sort of like goal setting is once you write it down, you're able to apply some level of focus to it, because now it's like on paper. Now it's
you write it down, it's real,
not just in your head. And so by listing a few things out, even though we didn't choose all of those, one of them was, how do I want to think about my future? That was, what I would call selfish. And then there was, one particular topic that was more internal conflict between divisions that I had sort of tried all my tricks and wasn't making progress. So, a challenge I was being honest about not making as much headway as I wanted to. And this is sort of how I work with my coach now, because I still go to a coach because obviously believe in it, is, a week before I meet with my coach, I send her a list of a few topics I might want to cover. I try to self-coach my way through them. And by the time we meet, there's always at least one that I haven't made as much progress as I wanted to. And so I open that up to our partnership. And,
Gotcha.
My job there is really, here's what I want to accomplish. And then she'll start asking questions as we dig through a meaningful path to at least make progress on that.
Sure. So when you're meeting with a coach, and let me make sure I've got this right. And I tend to repeat a lot just to make sure I'm hearing what you're saying. We can distill that for the audience too. When you're meeting with your coach, you said if there's something you haven't gotten quite as much done on, you're bringing that to the forefront.
Yeah.
You're bringing that to the table and saying, hey, I didn't make progress on that. And I think by default, so often, we do the other way, right?
Yeah.
Lots of leaders, lots of managers, lots of employees, people, we go, I didn't make the progress I wanted to on that. Let me kick a little dirt on that. Let's talk about all the cool stuff that I did, right? But you do it the other way.
No, I'm a chronic overachiever, or at least like to be seen as one. And so, if I have set my goals like I like to, they're SMART goals. Now, I don't know if you use those, in the
specific,
training,
measurable.
But that are relevant is really important, because that means it's something of value. And if you leave that one out, you're just dealing with crumbs, not the big rocks. And to me, the fun of it is trying to, chisel the big rocks.
That's good. No, and I want people to hear that. So if you're missing the mark somewhere, whether you're going to a coach, when you're going to your manager, if there's something that and again, what I'm hearing from Scott, and I think there's so much value in that. Like if there's something you haven't accomplished this week or this month that you're really going after, bring that to the forefront so you can focus on that and get it accomplished. I think that's valuable.
And I know it's tough with managers and it's tough with your peers, but one of the values of having this objective third-party coach is no judgment.
Right.
And if I'm doing my job right, there's a ton of psychological safety in it. Because, I believe people are not broken. It's just, we're all working through stuff. And so whatever it is they want to approach, their goal is my goal. And that's at least coaching the way I've been trained.
So I may catch you flat-footed on this one, but I'm really curious what you would do, because you're in the coaching space, but you also said you said I still have a coach, and I think that's valuable. The fact that it's like you eat where you work type of deal, right? So if I'm somebody, if I'm a leader, a manager, and I'm saying, man, I'm stuck, and I'm hearing these guys talk about this, and I think I could use a coach. And whether that may be you. Speaking of which, I know I get ahead of myself. I'll try and remember this ahead of time. So first off, if you want to connect with Scott in a coaching or consultative fashion, you can go to doyneservices.com. For anybody that's listening, it's DOYNE services, SERVICES. That's all one word, no spaces.com. You can connect with him. And this is just to be clear with everyone, because you all know, for the people that tune into the show weekly, I don't do a lot of pre-conversation. So I may be catching Scott flat-footed on this one. I'm curious whether it's you or another coach. What are 2 or 3 questions that I should be asking my coach to pick them?
Yeah. The most important thing to me that separates certified coaches, which I've gone through my training and certification with International Coaching Federation. There's a code of ethics, which is based on the premise that there's actually no advice. I'm not telling people what to do or how to do it. I think people have a lot of that in their lives already. And I am just prescribed to the way that ICF and Erickson, the school I went to, approach coaching, where we are partners in the process. We facilitate and we help people think through or document what they want to accomplish, create some level of definition around the challenge, and then make realistic progress towards those goals. So I would ask, whether they're certified or not, what is their approach? Most coaches I've talked to and have worked with have trial sessions. I would absolutely do that to see if there's a level of trust and chemistry. I think those are probably the most important factors.
Okay. So I heard three things come out of that. One is whether they are certified or not, make sure that they operate with a code of ethics.
Hmm.
Look for somebody that's offering a trial session, and then or so that you can connect. And I think
Yeah.
that's valuable. And that you said making sure that they have sort of a path and a process that they're going to approach.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm just jotting that down so I can get the stuff in the notes later. Here's something else that I'm curious. So going back to the previous part of our conversation, and one of the things that you said the coach brought out in you was, you said when I was talking to her, that through some questioning you were loyal to people,
Hmm.
not loyal to the company.
Yeah.
So I'm curious of two things. One, how to peel the onion back on that. How did you come to that realization?
Mhm.
And then two, second question, uh, what created that loyalty?
Yeah, isn't that beautiful? I love that question. The first part is I don't remember the first question, but the way the coach listened, and I really want to emphasize, like, there is a superhuman level of listening that some of these coaches are capable of. And it's not just the active listening, it's really hearing words, intonations, seeing nonverbal cues. And what she said was, Scott, you've said loyalty a few times. What does that mean to you?
Mm, okay.
That's the type of question your brain doesn't actually let you ask yourself. It's almost like an Excel circular reference sometimes. Your brain is there. The neuroscience on this stuff is fascinating because it's there to protect you. There's like an ego sort of piece of it.
Sure.
And the coach has permission to penetrate it. And so that question, is where then I distilled my own definition. And to me, it was people versus company. So then to your second
Interesting.
part, right?
Yes.
What was it about the people? The leaders that I had been with, it had been a long time. We had earned each other's trust. They had listened to me. They had supported me in my career. They were invested not just in my professional life, but my personal life. Some of those things that may sound foreign to a lot of people, I had in those bosses,
Sure.
and I knew what I had. And so that to me, it's how I built my career. And it's hopefully how some of my team members saw me over time as well.
I love that. And let me run that back to you because I think it's valuable when, so often it's easy to ask the question, well, hey, what are 4 or 5 characteristics of leaders? But like when we talk about something like this, we have this pre-definition. There are
Mm.
people that say, well, I've got this pre-definition. Like you bring up loyalty. I am a loyalty driven soul, right? Like I will be loyal to somebody if, right. And they
Hmm.
meet these certain
Hmm.
criteria. And when we're talking about like how do you build the perfect leader, what's the well, there is no perfect leader, but there are lots of great characteristics, and you just nailed 4 that I think are so valuable when it comes to leadership as a whole. And these transcend time, they transcend different business verticals. One is that time together, it's time invested. There is no replacement for time with somebody, real time. And you think about that in so many, and you said this, not me, I'm just pulling it out because it's like there's no replacement for time with your kids, time with your
Hmm.
spouse, time, and all this flies in the face of a lot of leadership, with yourself, time with those friends and those relationships, those leaders in your life. So you said, hey, we had this time together, right? And when you get to that place where you just know, like, oh, okay, well, they're going to pull on the door handle, so and so's coming through the door right now, and so on and so forth. You there's a certain familiarity that's created with time, and there is no replacement for time other than time. Yeah, that's it. And then secondly, you said was that through that time you built trust. And I think that's a really valuable asset for all leaders to have. Like you have a foundation of integrity and trust and honesty with somebody. You said they listened to you.
Hmm.
I mean, oof, it's so valuable. There are so many people, and if you're listening to this show, and I'm telling you, take notes, right? Time together, trust, Listening comes up so often in our conversations. And again, if I were to ask 100 different leaders, hey, give me your top 5 leadership characteristics that would just, make the greatest leader or manager in the world, out of those 100, we would have 400. There would be a lot of overlap,
Right,
but there
right.
would be
I'd like to see the word
400
cloud on that one.
Right, no kidding. And I will tell you, listening is, if we're talking about the word cloud, listening is going to be one of the big ones, because I think it's massive. And then the last one, and you didn't say this directly, but I picked up on it, is just because you said, hey, they were invested in you, in
Yeah.
your goals, in your time. The only way that you establish that is through a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
They actually cared. And I remember reading, I think it was an Og Mandino book when I was getting into sales. And he said, I wish I could remember the title of the book and I would share it. I do this stuff. I wander off and it's like, I remember the author, but Og Mandino in one of his books stated, he says, there's no replacement for genuine caring other than genuine caring. And so it's like, if you care about somebody and you have that relationship, man, you can help people go so far. I think that's massive. So we covered a little bit of, okay, here's how Scott transitioned careers, and you moved through this stuff, and I think you gave some really good pointers on if I'm looking for a career coach or somebody to start in my transition. One of the notes, and I want to pull this out because again, we exchanged very little. I think we exchanged like a 2-sentence email, and I love that because it keeps things fresh and genuine. One of the items you said, hey, we could talk about sort of midlife crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about that partly for many reasons. One is I think it's valuable because I don't think there's an age tattooed on when midlife crisis happens. But secondarily, you and I were talking beforehand, we're similar in age. And so does midlife crisis create, like, is there an awakening? Is that the time to start a career transition? When you put that one notation, you said, we can talk about midlife crisis. What did that mean to you? Can you
Yeah, well, I will unabashedly point to the book over my shoulder because I released that book last year on my 50th birthday, and it's called Exploring the Midlife Career Crisis. And so that was me getting a lot of this stuff out, about my own transition. So it's all in the book. I'm rather transparent, both in the book and on LinkedIn. But I also pull some case studies together of other people that went through career pivots. And then there's some tools and frameworks for people to help themselves. Not everybody is ready for a coach. I wanted to democratize some of the tools and frameworks and methods. And so there's 9 different ones in the book that people can sort through. So that's out there. It's on Amazon. People can find it.
So Exploring the Midlife Career Crisis,
yes,
Scott Doyne. So I'll make sure and I'll get that in our notes too. And hey, listen, man, this is not a no pitch zone. If you've got good stuff, that's the reason we're together. Share it.
It allowed me to, clearly my age was part of my fascination with the topic. And so I did a ton of research and looked into, the mathematics first, what is midlife, and you can calculate it. And, is it your adult life or a midpoint, or is it a life change, a health change, a life stage as people get married later, have kids later, right? What does all that mean? And I would loosely sort of call it 30s to 50s just for argument's sake.
I was going to ask.
The way you honed in on the word time, I was probably smiling a lot because do you remember a sports reporter on TNT named Craig Sager? Does that ring a bell? He was a very flashy, colorful, wore paisley suits, was on the sideline. Anyways, popular announcer. Sure. And in my company, so I got familiar with him. But he went through a very difficult cancer diagnosis and struggle and ended up winning one of those ESPY awards for the Jimmy V Award for Perseverance. And he gave this speech, and I quote him several times in the book, and he ends up saying, time is simply how you live your life. And so to me, the book actually became very much like a Carpe Diem book, which I didn't see coming. Sure. But in reflecting on mortality through the pandemic, and then as I reached 50 and my parents are of a certain age, I think that's a lot of what came out is it doesn't really matter what age or when you get that light bulb or how you define crisis even. What is it we want out of our lives, and how do we want to spend our time?
So, having done the research and written the book and talking about this subject, and you said 30s to 50s, do you think that do you see more career pivots? Do you see more transitions during that time, 30 to 50 years old?
Yeah, 100%. And the timing of the book has to be mentioned because 2022-23 really were radical amounts of layoffs,
Oh
not
yeah.
just in my industry and media, but tech for sure. And
Yeah.
so the areas I was most familiar with, and some of the data is in there, just about how many people were laid off and what percentage was in that age bracket. So the involuntary pivot or the involuntary churn,
Sure.
I think exacerbated what I was feeling and seeing in the
Hmm.
industry, and the economy overall. And that to me timed out well with the message I wanted to get across.
So when you're seeing these career pivots, I'm curious, do you see people going like is it a complete 180? You're seeing people go from leadership roles into something completely opposite, or you're seeing somebody go from a sales role into a service role, or are there things that align more? Man, I really don't know how I want to word that. Is it something that I mean, for example, I'll use myself as an example. I turned 50 this year.
Mhm.
And though I've always been somebody, I mean, we were even talking beforehand, and you could probably tell I'm someone that's carried through my faith quite a bit. Right now, I've gotten more involved in my church than ever in some leadership spaces and stuff, which is not, I mean, car sales into a lot more church activity. Those don't always coincide. Do
Mm.
you see stuff
Mhm.
like that where it's like a 180 pivot? Do
Yeah.
you see things that align more closely? I'm curious.
Yeah, I'd say there is a significant trend, especially at those ages, towards passion and purpose. And I really do believe the pandemic accelerated it. We had a lot of time for introspection, thinking about what matters in the face of mortality,
Hmm.
that was more obvious than ever for the greatest segment of the population. And so I think all that did add up to thinking about how you want to spend your time, what you want to give to the world, the universe, society. It's not for everybody, and there's realities of compensation, of course. So I
Sure.
think I think that age group, yes. And then you've got the younger generations, and I see that passion and purpose just as strong, yet from the beginning.
Yeah.
And
I
so you combine all those people that are thinking about passion and purpose more than maybe our generation was trained to, and certainly
mhm.
the generation before us. That now I think there's a wave of that coming through where yes, people that I work with are thinking about how they want to spend their time, and even if it's not in what we'll call their day job, the era of the side hustle is on, and
Oh,
how people want to feel about their whole self in contributing. It doesn't have to just be one piece now because there's mechanisms and less barriers to entry on putting your puzzle together in a different way.
sure. Well, and I think people are now more than ever is they are thinking about, well, what's the mark I'm going to leave? And it's not the size of the mark. It's not necessarily like the fame and
Yeah.
fortune. I think that's something in our generation. We sort of had Hollywood there. So you had this sort of fame and fortune and glow and aura,
Mhm.
whereas I think in the last probably 15 or 20 years with social media, there's a lot more connectivity in that space. So I don't think it's the fame and fortune. I think
Mhm.
it's really like, what's the mark? What is it that I'm leaving? At least that's been my experience. And
Yeah.
you brought up, it's interesting because you're like saying with our age group, like we were, you show up, you go to work, you work hard, you this and that. And I think each generation, when a new generation comes along, we go, oh, look at these darn kids, they just don't work
Naturally.
anymore. But the reality is too, I think a lot of kids that are, we were talking beforehand, we have some kids that are similar in age as well, like my 18-year-old son. I
Mhm.
think some of that, we created that situation. Our generation created that situation because they looked at us and went, man, I really want to be more passion driven than just trying to work for the paycheck. I want to do this
Yeah.
other thing, maybe a little different than what my parents did, and I'll be the first to admit I'm guilty of that. And that's probably what I'm going through right now.
It makes sense. It's only logical because not only does the world change, but we change and our
Sure.
perspective changes. And even seeing it like you and I are doing through our kids' eyes
Yes.
gives us our own sort of medicine.
Mhm.
If you don't want to be a hypocrite, then you actually listen to some of the people you're parenting or mentoring or training. And I think there's a lot to learn, in sort of a reverse mentoring situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think still, and take this for what it's worth, whether it be leadership or business or just parenting. One thing I have learned many years as a parent now, and like you're saying, there's a lot to learn. The reality is, in most cases, nobody taught us to be a parent. It's our kids that thrust us into that space of you have to. We weren't taught. It wasn't handed.
Mhm.
We had our mentors. I had my mom and
Mhm.
dad to look at and that
Mhm.
sort of deal. But the reality is, our kids are teaching us to parent every day. And so I think that there's a lot of value in that when it comes to leadership. If we're listening to the people that we lead,
Yeah.
sometimes you can develop some really good leadership from that every day. But it goes back to one of those things you said, is like, you have to be willing to listen.
That was always my tendency. And I think that's some of what was in me before I realized coaching was a full-time possibility, is I
Sure.
really loved, mentoring and professional development and helping people get the most out of themselves. I just wasn't born to be a dictator. Like that's just,
Sure.
that's some of that's personality, some of it's training, some of it's instinct, some of it's role models. And for me, over the course of my management and leadership career, I finally found some role models at one point. It's like, oh wait, I can do it the way I want to. I don't have to be that, a-hole in the corner office necessarily, because all different styles exist. And,
Hmm.
there's different styles that are successful. And it was so liberating for me to realize, kind of in the middle of my career, that's like, oh, I can swim downstream and do it the way that my heart is telling me to. And that listening stuff was so incredibly powerful. Like, talking about like flipping the org chart, I
Sure.
always like drawing it upside down and thinking about that role of listening and proceeding with what your staff thinks you should do. I don't think it's
Sure.
always that way. There's definitely a decisiveness that I had to grow into. There's accountability, there's authority. So I had to grow into some of those pieces, but
Sure.
the desire I had to help others succeed, it was just part of who I was.
I love it. Hey, a couple reminders, and we still have some time here. But while I'm here, I get ahead of myself. So I'm going to give Scott a couple more pitches. So one, make sure and connect with him on LinkedIn. If you look him up on LinkedIn, Scott, and then Doyne, Doyne. If you look him up, he just comes right up. It's linkedin.com/Scott-Doyne. Also, you can, if you're interested in coaching, consulting, career coaching, if you're considering a transition or a pivot, or someone who is,
Mhm.
right? Check out Doyne Services, Doyne services.com. And then also, I didn't have a placard for this one, but make sure, where I would start, and just after talking to you, Scott, like, I love conversations like this, man. Just after having the conversation, if someone is considering that and you want some more Scott's wisdom, check out the Exploring the Midlife Career Crisis book on Amazon. It's over his shoulder there. So, um, couple of questions. One of the things that came up in this little last segment, you said, "Hey, I found some really great role models to do this stuff."
Mhm.
Who are some of your role models? And even if they're
Yeah.
people that we haven't heard of, who are the people that you said, man, that person, and maybe one or two that we have heard of?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll start with one that's grown on me, I'll have to admit, and it's from the sports world.
Okay.
LeBron James. And he was not my favorite player. I grew up in Cincinnati. He played in Cleveland, not a match.
Okay.
But over time, seeing what he did in making his teammates better and making his teams better, and not always having to be the scorer, but sometimes being the assister or like whatever it took. I think there's so much to be learned from that leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And add one other word we talked about earlier is integrity. Outside of a press conference where we talked about going to South Beach, a guy with that kind of spotlight from the age of 16 till now
Sure.
living with integrity in the public eye, I just think is incredibly impressive.
Sure.
So I'll
Who else?
start
Give
with
me
him.
one more.
Now,
No,
more on the personal side,
okay.
the manager I was referring to was a guy named Matt Hong, and I'll say it out loud. He's been a sports media executive for a long time. He's still around the industry. He just has this way of how he leads where it's not telling other people what to do, but he's still decisive. It's listening, and maybe not always agreeing, but having a civil debate about it. It's the relationship building that you talked about earlier. It's inspiring, it's vision, it's integrity. And to me, he was the type of leader I just wanted to continue to be, that didn't have to be yelling at people and telling people what to do all the time, but still had enough authority that he portrayed in his own way, that it was just a special combination for me to sort of see like, oh, I'm good with who I am. I don't have to pretend to be somebody else. I'll just do it my way, and that's going to work out.
That's good. Well, and I think too, one of the things that people that I would like people to hear, and so I always try and point this stuff out. It's easy for you when I'm asking who are our role models. You're like, hey, LeBron James, and here's why. And then, Matt Hong, and here's why. And I think it's important for people to know. So often we look at people and it's like, oh, who do you admire? Or who's a role model for you, and so on and so forth. And we try and search for these big names. Well, I've read this guy's books, or I've done this. But the reality is you have people that are pouring into your life every single day. You have people that are invested, that make you feel good, and you know that. And I think it's important to, check that box and say, okay, this person, and here's why. And so I do want people to hear that it's something that's, it doesn't always have to be the big name. It can be this person, it's like the seventh grade English teacher, right? That you go, oh my gosh, that person did so much for me. And people have to understand, when you're in a leadership role, sometimes that's reversed, right? Sometimes you're the person on the other side. You're just, by investing in somebody, by pouring into somebody, by listening to them, by offering. I do this all the time. I have many gals that work for me, and they'll ask, actually they won't ask. A lot of times they'll be going through some stuff and I'm like, hey, I'm a master of unsolicited advice. Let's go. Let's have this conversation. Right. And so sometimes it's worth, and I call that just a conversation starter, just getting it going so that they know it's a safe place to talk with you. And I think there's a lot of power in that. So I'm curious, because you bring up LeBron James, and I'm sure you have lots of other sports influences in your life that you could list, probably many more than I could, for sure. I'm curious, because you see LeBron James as a leader in sports. There are lots of people. I mentioned, Peyton Manning earlier. We see these figures that are like, they have this commanding presence and this authority and this, vision for the way that the game is supposed to be, that's out in front of them, whatever game, whatever discipline it is that they're participating in. How would you parallel, Scott, from being in that world so much? How would you parallel leadership in sports to leadership in business?
That's a phenomenal question. I really think it comes down to leadership styles, different environments. And what's amazing is it differs by sport. And, let's talk about hockey for a second, because to me, it's the group of guys that are most down to earth. They're not about themselves. In fact, as we started to work with the National Hockey League with Turner Sports and Bleacher Report, it was actually tough to find individual athletes and stars that wanted to be represented as stars, because they truly believe that the team comes first. And so I think that, to me, is like business culture, right? The culture of the league, the culture of a team absolutely translates to the business environment, right? What type of company do you want to have? Do you want to have team first people, or do you want to have me first people? But at the same time, you've got these other sports. I think basketball is prone to it, because generally there's 5 people on the court at a time, whether it's men's or women's basketball. So it's just a small number of people where the possibility of somebody taking over a game actually happens. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean they're always the most valuable player, but a lot of time that happens. Soccer, then you've got 11 people on the field. And my
Hmm.
favorite soccer players are actually the setup folks.
Okay.
To me, for any sports fans out there, I can go on forever on this stuff, but it's the Iniestas or the Kevin De Bruyne's, the ones, maybe they're not getting the most goals, but if they weren't there, those goals aren't happening.
Right.
And
No, I
so
love
who
that.
are those people in your corporate environment? Who are the setup folks that don't need the credit? To me, some of the most valuable people in the digital media industry were project management folks.
Sure.
All of the responsibility and none of the authority, and they got to keep everybody on track for product launches. Like, that is a really difficult job. I could never do it. And so those are some of those unsung heroes that I think absolutely were some of our greatest leaders, because they could do it laterally
Hmm.
without having the hierarchical authority.
No, that's super powerful and super. As you're talking about like the media folks, right? There are people you just can't do without. The graphic designers, right? There's going to be somebody that stands out, that it's going back to your hockey example, right? Who has the most assists? I mean, I'm obviously a hockey fan, been doing 20 years of actively playing that sport, and I agree with you. Like, they're the most humble, best guys. Just saying,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
It really is something. I think you bring a really valuable point to this, because when you're leading somebody in those senses, in from athletics to business, it's like, what is the culture you want? I think you asked that question directly, and I want people to hang on that. Like, what is the culture you want? What is the culture you're developing? I'm just curious, because we've talked on the subject a lot about players.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that culture develop from the coach level to the
Mm-hmm.
players?
Mm-hmm. I think communication is the first word that comes to mind. The goal setting, the communication, the expectations, the transparency, the honesty and candor, right? All that stuff is related, because if you're not on the same page, you don't have a chance.
Sure.
Now, how that's evolved in coaching, look at what's going on in college sports and the players making more money than the coaches. How does that change the dynamic? And which coaches have maybe retired because they didn't want to deal with some of
Didn't
that?
want to mess with it anymore.
But
Yeah.
who's actually still there in finding ways to thrive within the environment change and still have a culture, at least so far, that is productive?
Well, I mean, somebody I really admire, and he's here, is Deion Sanders right now,
Mm,
and the CU. Like, I love that. Like, he sets the tone for the team, for the coaches, and I followed him, pretty religiously, and follow what it is that he shares and what he stands for. Though I've never met him, at least on the
mm,
exterior, right?
yeah,
Especially being with CU now and so forth. As I watch him, he can set the tone. And I've said this before, and I watched this when my own son was playing football. He can set the tone and set the expectations, but ultimately it has to be the players, it has to be the team, it has to be everybody else that
mhm.
will carry that out and execute it. Because at the end of the day, the coach isn't in the huddle, right? The coach is not there.
That's
You
right.
can have the idea to, yeah, I want to set all this, I want to set it up, and that's how I want to have it happen. But you got to have those people, and you said it before, you got to have those people that are on the inside, that are leading from that central point, and are the
Totally.
real influencers.
Totally. Because we talked about, my definition of loyalty earlier and
Yeah,
how it stems from trust and your managers or leaders caring about you. You bring up
absolutely.
Dion, is there's no doubt he cares about those, not just players or student athletes, those people.
Yes,
And that created a level of loyalty and belief in themselves that, creates progress.
absolutely. So as we come, we're almost an hour in, so I'll bring it down here. A couple of questions for you, just to wrap it up. First off, let me remind everybody one more time. If you want to connect with Scott, you can go to doyneservices.com, DOYNESERVICES.com, doyneservices.com. You can also connect with him on LinkedIn. Scott, any final thoughts, maybe something I didn't hit on that you're like, man, I've been itching to share this and I gotta share it, or any final thoughts to take us out for the show?
I just hope people are out there realizing that they don't have to do it themselves. You know, I think listening to content like this can be valuable, whether it's me as a guest or not. You've had some great ones. And so just realizing there's resources out there, there's people out there. If you're willing to ask for help, there's nothing you can't accomplish, but doing it yourself is not required.
Powerful words, man. I absolutely agree with you. I think it does take, anyway, that's just a really powerful thought to take us out on. If you would hang out just a moment, and I'm going to go ahead and close out the show. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And that, ladies and gentlemen, first off, thank you to my guest, Scott Doyne, for spending time with me today, just sharing his wisdom and his insight. I always love these conversations, and I'm leaving here. Again, I average about 2 pages of notes, and that's when I think I know. It's like, oh, okay, we got to wrap it up because I got nowhere else to write. So just so much good insight. And if you would, do me a favor. If when you're listening to this show, or if you're listening to the show or watching it, whatever channel you may be watching on, Spotify or YouTube or Amazon or iTunes, whatever your thing is, do me a favor, throw some thumbs up on it, because that is one of the ways that shows like this grow and continue to grow, is through, you know, likes and shares and that sort of thing. And that's really helpful to us. Most importantly, though, and you all know this about me, if you know somebody that would gain something from this, and you're like, hey man, I could really help propel this person in their career, or they really need to hear this message, or I've got someone that would, I've been trying to get this through to them, and maybe if they listen to this conversation, it will help. If you know somebody whose life this show would impact, share it with them. Package it up and email it, share it in a DM, whatever it is that you do, but get that message to them, because that's the whole goal of the show, is just help people grow, help leaders grow, and help business progress forward. So I appreciate everybody. Thank you for spending the time with me today. And my new friend, Scott, like I said, connect with him at doyneservices.com and on LinkedIn. And until we speak next week, stay great, everybody. We'll talk soon.